Everybody, welcome back. Välkommen tillbaka. Tack för sist. So, when I started this YouTube channel, it was primarily talking about Norway and Viking history and Norwegian heritage and history and that kind of thing. And I've obviously done videos on a lot of different things since then. But, you know, I thought, I've had actually several people say, I'd love to hear you talk about Norway again. So I thought I would do that. I'm heading back to Norway with my wife and 3 of my kids this summer. It's been 15 years, which blows my mind, because when I went last time, I swore I wouldn't wait this long. And the years just fly by. And the next thing you know, I'm like, geez, a lot of my family that's older, I'm not going to see them again if I don't get back soon. And it's just too long to go in between. I say it all the time when I do videos about Norway. It's hard to even put it into words what Norway means to me, because it's where I'm from, but it's like deep in my soul. Norge i mitt hjerte, Norway in my heart. It's when I remember when I flew back the last time, summer of 2011, my grandma was 96 years old, and I'm the oldest grandson on that side. And I knew there was a really good chance that if I didn't get back soon, I wasn't going to see her again. Excuse me. Forgot to bring my drink out to the truck, so I've got my, what are these? Bubblies. Michael Bublé. And I'm really glad I went back. It turned out, I booked my ticket before she really got sick, but we knew she was not doing great. And I got to go back and see her. And she actually kind of had a little resurgence after I was there in, I think it was June or July of 2011. And she ended up having a little bit of a resurgence. She lived for another 6 months, but her mind was clear till the end. And when I saw her that last time, the very first thing she said to me was "Tack för allt," which means thank you for everything. I hadn't seen her in, I think it might have been 15 years at that point. It's just, I wish I was going back more often. I don't know why I do. Life just happens and gets in the way, and next thing you know, it's been 15 years. But we are going back, so I'm excited about that. But a lot of my friends have said, we would love to go to Norway with you. And I said, well, I need to do a trip with my family first. Otherwise, they won't be happy with me if I took friends to Norway before I took them. So hopefully in a couple of years, a bunch of us are going to go back, get a big Airbnb and hang out. But the main thing I think of when I think about Norway is the country itself, the scenery, the beauty of it. You know, I've been a lot of places and I've seen a lot of pretty places, but I've never been anywhere that compares with Norway. You know, Switzerland looks beautiful. Ireland looks beautiful. There's gorgeous places all over the United States. You know, I've been to lots of national parks here. It's beautiful, but the diversity of Norway, like if you fly into Oslo, it's very different than flying into like Stavanger or Bergen on the west coast. Oslo is very rolling hills. In fact, when I was in Anchorage years ago, the first thing I thought was Anchorage looks a lot like Oslo. Just kind of the rolling hills and eventually leading to mountains. But Oslo is a beautiful city. I didn't spend a ton of time there. In fact, just a few days, but it's very pretty. But my hometown is Stavanger on the west coast. Bergen is just north of there. So the cities there's 4 kind of major cities in Norway. There's Oslo, which is by far the biggest. I'm sure it's well over 1 million people. Then I believe it's Bergen, and then Trondheim and Stavanger. Trondheim and Stavanger, I think, are really close in population. Bergen's a little bit bigger. And people that are from Bergen will say that's the prettiest city in the country. For me, it's Stavanger, and I know I'm biased, but it's just gorgeous. There's so much around there. Like, we'll be going to Preikestolen, which is the pulpit. Preikestolen. It's almost 2,000 feet straight down to the fjord. I'm sure you've probably seen it. Well, if you saw Mission Impossible Fallout, that's where Tom Cruise and Dean Cavill fight at the end with the helicopter scene. That's on Preikestolen. And the fjord that's there is Lysefjord, which means lys is light, which is kind of funny because the first word I ever learned in my life was lys. My dad would point to the light and say lys, and that's the very first word I ever learned. It's stunning when you're up on top of there. There is no way to describe it except stunning. It's like something out of a movie. It's like a Lord of the Rings scene. Both directions you look, and the fjord just goes on in both directions. From the top of Preikestolen, it looks pretty narrow. It's not super narrow. It's quite wide. And you can do cruises, which I hope we're going to do this, actually, because I've hiked Preikestolen twice. We're going to hike it again this year. But I've never done a cruise down below it. So I'm really hoping to do that. My mom was from a little town called Hjelmeland, which means land of helmets. The hills around there kind of look like helmets. And it's just this beautiful, picturesque little town, which we'll definitely spend some time there. I have family there. I had an aunt that just passed away not too long ago. My grandparents are in the church cemetery there, so I'll definitely be visiting all of them. I have an aunt that lives not very far from there. I have a cousin that lives out there, actually a couple of cousins, and you know, I'm already starting to touch base with people there because I would really like to get together and meet up. The one thing that makes me sad moving away from Norway, especially as young as I was, is I never really got to know my cousins, and I have a lot of them, and my aunts and uncles. Now, I've been back several times. I've mentioned before, I served a Mormon mission in Norway in my last 4 months. Maybe it was 5 months. We're in Stavanger. So I got a lot of chance to catch up, and I got to know some of them. But it was not like when you live close to your family. It's just not the same thing. So I didn't get to know a lot of them the way I wish I would have. My mom has 10 brothers and sisters, and my dad has 4. And every one of them has kids, several. So it's a lot of cousins. And so I'm really excited about that part. But the scenery is just, Stavanger is a really cool city. So there's a part of Stavanger that's called Gamle Stavanger, which means old Stavanger. And the houses there are mostly built, I think, in the 1700s, if I remember right. They're all like white houses with cobblestone streets going between them. And it's very old European. Downtown Stavanger is amazing as well. There's an old church in Stavanger called Domkirke, which means Church of the Dome Church, which I believe is coming up on its 900th anniversary. In fact, it might even be this year. They've been renovating it. I think it's going to be unveiled again not long before we get there. I think I'm remembering that right. So it's a very cool, you know, Middle Ages church, and it's quite large. And it's amazing to go inside and think about, you know, the technology they had damn near 1,000 years ago, and they built these kind of things. Stavanger has, the downtown area is a lot of walking areas. There's all these roads that are just for pedestrians. It's all cobblestone, lots of shops and tourist places and cafes and bars and coffee shops. And it's one of my favorite things to do is just to wander around there because it just has this feel to it. Now, granted, it's 40 something years ago that I lived there last, actually lived there. So things have changed a lot. It's not the same as when I lived there, and I'm no expert on what it's like now. I can only talk about what it was then. And the whole feel of the country was very friendly. Now, Norwegians, for the most part, are not the most outgoing, you know, they're not going to just walk up and start talking to a stranger for the most part. I'm kind of the exception to that because I'm very social. I talk to everybody. I love striking up conversations, making new friends. You know, I've heard a lot of people say, don't you have enough friends? And I'm like, I don't think you can ever have too many friends. So yeah, it's just, it's a feel for me, but it's spectacular. If you ever get the chance to go, I would definitely, like I said, Oslo's really pretty and there's lots of stuff to see. There's museums, there's outdoor museums, there's parks. It's incredible. Oslo Harbor is really cool. But the West Coast is just a completely different thing. The fjords, the mountains, and I've been all over Norway. I lived way up in North Norway. I was in the summer of '83. I was in the land of the midnight sun. The sun never set, which is very hard to get used to. It's really hard to sleep, even with your curtains closed. It's just, you never know what time it is if you're not looking at a watch. And every one of these towns, at least back then, had a very unique feel. And it's just like in the States, you know, you have the Southern dialect, you have the Midwest dialect. Yeah, you know, like Chicago has its own dialect. You got the Boston dialect. Norway is very similar, but it's more extreme because here we use mostly the same words. I mean, you know, everywhere's got some words that they are unique to their area. In Norway, the words sound different. Like if you're in Trondheim or Stavanger or Oslo, they are, if you don't speak Norwegian, like you've just learned one dialect of Norwegian, I have a hard time understanding some of them. Now, I didn't when I lived there. I got used to all of them. And I traveled, like I said, I think I lived in 8 or 9 cities while I was there. And I traveled to probably 15 or 16, all the way from Oslo to way up north to Tromsø. And they just have this feel. We have a bit of that in the States too, you know, like the South has a certain culture, and the West Coast where I am now has a culture, and Utah has a culture, and Pennsylvania, everywhere kind of has their own feel. But in Norway, it's very distinct because you got to remember, until the last 100 years or so, people in these little towns and villages were so isolated. There was no way to, even now, if I travel from Stavanger to Bergen, I can't just, well, you can drive there, but you would have to take all kinds of detours. I'm not even positive you could. You take ferries. So you can't just get somewhere. And back then, you know, you just didn't get to other towns. So they were very isolated, and they all had their own kind of Norwegian culture. Food too, like Norway's not known for food. I'll admit that. I love it. There's certain things like kumla, which is kind of like a potato dumpling, and then you burn butter and put the burnt butter on it, serve it with sausage. And it depends on what part of the country you are in, because they do it differently in different parts of the country too. But a lot of people would taste it and think this is the most blah, boring thing ever. And to me, it's like one of my favorite things I could have. So it's because I was raised with it. My mom kept cooking Norwegian meals the whole time we were growing up. My parents spoke Norwegian the whole time growing up. Unfortunately, I was the only son that really stuck with it and kept the language alive. And then when I went back to Norway in the 80s, then it really came back full circle. But yeah, the food is not, I mean, if you get to Norway, you definitely got to try it out and taste the different things, go to different places and check it out. What was the other thing I was going to say? Dang it. Just flitted out of my head. But the beauty of the country is the main thing. And the people are very friendly, but like I said, they're not super outgoing. I'm trying to refresh my brain of what I was going to say. Oh, it's very expensive. If you go to Norway, and be prepared beforehand for sticker shock. Now, the one thing that I found was actually pretty reasonable was an Airbnb, which is what we're doing. If you stay in a hotel, hotels are very expensive. You know, if you like beer, you know, a 6-pack of beer is going to cost you $20. If you go to a bar, here's a quick funny story. So I was there in 96, January of 96. And I was hanging out with a couple of my cousins and my cousin's husband and one of their friends. And so there were 5 of us. I'm so sorry. Allergies. And we hung out at their apartment for a while and had some drinks. And then we're like, let's hit the bars. So we went downtown Stavanger, and I didn't even realize the nightlife was there, because when you're kind of wandering through Stavanger during the day, you don't really notice the bars as much. But once you get down there this was probably a Saturday night, there's people everywhere hanging out, having a good time, and then they loosen up. Then the Norwegians loosen up. You get a little bit of alcohol in them, and it's like different people. But we ended up at this one bar. And I remember I gave the bartender my American Express to start a tab. And I think we had maybe 3-4 rounds at the most. So, you know, either 15 or 20 drinks. And I was like, I should probably check my tab. You know, it's probably pushing like $150 now with this many drinks. And so I asked for the balance, and it was like $380. And this is 30 years ago. And I was like, whoa, you know, just sticker shock. So I was like, somebody else's turn to start. And so I paid off my tab, and then somebody else took over. But yeah, the last time I was there, I stayed with my parents the whole time. And I've mentioned many times, my parents are LDS Mormon. And just out of respect, I don't drink around them. And so, you know, I was there for 2 weeks, I think. And I got to the airport, and I wanted a beer. I was like, it's been a couple of weeks. I would like a nice big cold beer. So I was sitting at the airport bar waiting for my plane. And I said, you know, the bartender asked what I wanted. I said, I want a beer. You know, small or large? I'm like, give me the biggest one you got. And I drank the beer, and he brought me my bill. No, he told me first. I said, how much is it, by the way? And he told me, and I said, no, what did I say? I said, now I'm having a brain fart, but I was thinking it was half the price it was. So this beer, 30 years ago at the airport with a tip, was around $20. I mean, it was a big beer, but it was crazy. So just be prepared for that if you go. But just know that you will have the experience of a lifetime. Stavanger, you know, you don't think about Norway and beaches. Way up north in Bodø, which is a city I lived in, right up close to the Arctic Circle, there's an amazing, gorgeous beach there. You would never think it. In Stavanger, where I'm from, there's a beach called Solestrand. Strand is beach. And it's like a really pretty beach with rolling sand dunes, and grass is growing out of the sand dunes, but just this nice beach. And because the Gulf Stream runs along the coast of Norway, it's really not that cold. I mean, the water's not warm, don't get me wrong, but it's not what you think. And if it hits 70 degrees and it's sunny, those beaches are packed, because 80 degrees doesn't happen a whole lot in where I'm from. And if it's 80, then everybody's out there. So yeah, it's just, and the culture of Norway, you know, I think I've mentioned this before. I bought a sweatshirt last time I was there, a hoodie for my wife. And I didn't notice that on like the corner of it, it said Norge established 1905, which that just pisses me off. So if you know Norwegian history, Norway went back and forth between kind of being conquered by Denmark and Sweden and off and on. But Norway was established in 872. And so if somebody says Norway established in 1905, to me, that's offensive. Norway's been around for way over 1,000 years. I mean, goes way back to the beginning of the Viking Age, the Viking kings. My dad has done our genealogy going back about 1,000 years, which is pretty incredible. He's hardcore. The Mormon Church actually has one of the best genealogy libraries in the world in Salt Lake City. So every time he comes down, he goes and spends time there. He's gone to a whole bunch of old churches and stuff in Norway to look up records. He's got friends help him. And it's just really cool looking back at this history. I have a little mini genealogy chart that's up by my trolls and my Viking stuff at home. So the culture is just really cool. It goes way, way back. And I get flack about this sometimes, and I don't care. It's more younger Norwegians will say stuff like, oh, Vikings, nobody cares about Vikings anymore. It's not true. Now, it might be true with younger people, younger generation. I can't speak to that, but I've known lots of Norwegians that are into Viking relics and Viking history, and you know, I know they're like any other people. There's good and there's bad there. But I've really started getting into the Viking history. So I'll do some more videos about that. This video is going longer than I planned. So I'm going to wind it down now. But if you ever get the chance to go to Norway, I would highly recommend it. The trains, the planes, the buses, the public transportation there is amazing. When you rent a car, most of the vehicles, from what I'm discovering now, are electric. And I actually researched this a bit because I was worried about getting an electric car and having any kind of problems charging it. But I guess they're ubiquitous. The charge. Okay, it's telling me my iPhone storage is full, which doesn't make any sense. So I got to sign off. We will talk to you again soon. Peace. Love.